Lucy Letby, wearing all black, is now giving evidence. Benjamin Myers, KC, asks Lucy Letby to confirm her full name and date of birth, which she does. She now tells the court about growing up in Hereford with herself, her mum and her dad. She said she always wanted to work with children and developed a preference for nursing towards the end of secondary school. She said she did a 3-year programme of nursing at the University of Chester, splitting her time between the university 50-50 and placements to gain clinical experience. The majority of her clinical experience was at the Countess of Chester Hospital, split between the children's ward and the neonatal ward. She qualified as a Band 5 nurse in September 2011. She says during a 12-month period, she would have cared for hundreds of babies. Asked if she had done anything to harm the babies deliberately, she says that was not the case. Quote, "I only did my best to care for them." Asked further about it, she adds, quote, "That is completely against everything a nurse is." Asked about how she felt about being removed from nursing duties, she says she was devastated, having prided myself on being competent. She says it really affected her. It was a life-changing moment in being put into a non-clinical role she did not enjoy. She said, quote, "From a self-confidence point of view, it made me question everything about myself." In September 2016, Letby says she received a letter from the Royal College of Nursing about the true reason for her redeployment, that she was being held responsible for the deaths of babies on the neonatal unit. She says she was putting in a grievance procedure about being redeployed. She says she did not know at the time how many babies she was being held responsible for. She says she felt it was, quote, "sickening to be held as a person responsible for the deaths of babies." She said she was told not to have contact with anyone on the unit other than 3 friends. 2 were nurses, 1 was a doctor. She said she saw her GP and she was diagnosed with depression and anxiety and was placed onto antidepressants. She says she takes medication for her depression now, as well as medication to help her sleep at night. She adds she cannot sleep without the medication. Becoming tearful, Letby says her job was her life. She said to have that taken away, my whole world just stopped. She says the situation has progressively got worse. Mr. Myers asks, "How hard is it to be what you're accused of?" Lucy Letby replies, "It's very difficult." Since November 2020, Letby says she has been remanded in prison. Mr. Myers asks Letby about her being arrested for the first time. Letby says this was nothing like she had ever experienced before. Wiping away tears, Letby says there was a knocking on the door at 6 a.m. from police at her Westbourne Road, Chester home. At the time, her father was with her. They had no idea at all the police were coming that day. She said, quote, "They told me I was being arrested for multiple counts of murder. They put me into handcuffs and took me away." After 3 days of police interviews, Letby was released on bail. She says she was not allowed to return to her Chester home and went to live with her parents in Hereford. Becoming tearful, she says the second arrest in 2019 was a mirror image of the first arrest. "It was the most scariest thing I've ever been through. It just traumatised me." Mr. Myers asks if the trauma has left Letby sensitive to certain things. Letby replies she is now sensitive to noises and is easily startled by new things. She says she has been diagnosed in prison by a psychologist with PTSD. She says the journey to and from court from prison is about an hour and a half each way. Letby has been at court each day throughout the trial. She says she usually returns to prison at 7 p.m. from court. Mr. Myers asks about the notes. Letby says about her notes, quote, "It's something I have done my whole life." She adds she has difficulties throwing things away, and that includes notes. Mr. Myers asks about one of the notes she had written. Letby says she does not have a precise date of when she had written it, between July 2016 and July 2018. The note is headlined, "Not Good Enough." Letby says she had written, quote, "I haven't done anything wrong," because she hadn't done anything wrong. She said where it states, quote, "worst case scenario," the police would get involved. Where it states slander and discrimination, She says that was how she felt the trust was towards her in regard to the allegations. Where it states, "I am an awful person," Letby said at the time she did feel an awful person, as she was worried she had made many mistakes. She said she was being taken away from the job she loved for things she had not done. In regard to the note, and where it states, "I'll never have children or marry," she says, "My whole situation felt helpless at times." In regard to the note, and where it states, "hate" and "hate myself for what this has," at the time I did hate myself, she says. She says she was made to feel incompetent in some way. She says her mental health at the time of writing this note was poor. She says it was difficult with the isolation I felt, and this lasted 2 years. In regard to where it states on the note, "I killed them on purpose because I am not good enough to care for them, I am a horrible, evil person," asked what she means by that, Letby responds, "I felt as though I hadn't been good enough, and in some way I had failed in my duties, my competencies. That was insinuated to me." In regard to "I am evil, I did this," she said, quote, "I felt at the time if I had done something wrong, I must have been an awful person." Letby says she feared she may have been incompetent, and because of that she had harmed those babies. She adds she could not understand why this happened to me. She says, looking back, she was really struggling at the time of writing the note. Mr. Myers says he will go through the background material for Letby first, then talk through the cases involving the babies. Letby is asked about the Countess of Chester Hospital and working there. She says her first placement on the neonatal unit was in 2010. As a full-time qualified nurse, her first work there was in January 2012. At that time, she was qualified to care for special care and high dependency babies, predominantly in nursery rooms 3 and 4. Asked about how much she valued her nursing work, she said, quote, "Massively. It was everything. I always strived to go on every course to be the best I could." Letby adds she completed a mentorship course so when students came in she could be their sole mentor at work. She qualified as a mentor fairly early on, probably in 2012. She says she really enjoyed that aspect. Mr. Myers says for 2 of the babies in the case, there was a student being monitored under Lucy Letby's supervision and guidance. Letby says it would depend on their training stage, but it would be under her direct supervision. Letby obtained her QIS qualification, allowing her to look after intensive care babies, following a university module which included a placement at Liverpool Women's Hospital involving hands-on clinical experience. The 6-month course concluded in March or April 2015. During a typical shift, Letby explains, there would be 2 Band 6 nurses on duty plus 1 Band 5 nurse with QIS training. Letby says there would be a lot of intensive care babies on the unit, and Letby would be looking after them, having had the experience of looking after babies in a Level 3 centre at Liverpool. The court has previously heard the Countess of Chester Hospital neonatal unit was a Level 2. Letby says she was very flexible and had been on hospital overnight accommodation prior to getting her house. She said she did enjoy the intensive care side, and she made other nurses aware that that was her main preference and where she was most happy. She denies saying other areas of her work in non-intensive care areas on the unit were boring. She does not recall ever having an argument with anyone about where she should be working. Mr. Myers asks about the electronic system nurses use to take notes, which would be inputted on terminals in the unit. One would be in room 1, Letby explains, the others would be outside the rooms. Each staff had specific login details to input notes. Mr. Myers asks about the notes being made retrospectively, usually at the end of a shift and can cover a period of several hours. Letby says to remember what had happened through the course of a shift for a baby, her retrospective notes to be documented would be compiled from a mixture of documentation at the time and notes she had written on the back of her handover sheet. Mr. Myers asks about an example, for one of Child I, a note written by Letby at 8:43 AM at the end of Letby's shift. Letby explains she would have made notes on paper prior to writing them on the terminal, as a retrospective note at the end of her shift. Letby explains there are nursing notes and family communication notes, which are separate. The former are clinical ones, the latter specifically for family. Asked about the notes, Letby says ideally they would be disposed of at the end of the shift in the confidential waste bin. Letby says she would normally store the handover sheets in her pocket and as a result would take them home. The court has previously heard several handover notes were found at Letby's home at the time of her arrest. Asked about the timings of the notes made, Letby says they would be accurate as they could be, and the prescriptions would be accurate to the minute. The nursing notes would be approximations. Mr. Myers refers to an observation chart for child O, with observations for heart rate, temperature and respirations. Letby explains how the readings would be taken. The routine observations would take a couple of minutes. Letby adds that for each observation, ideally it would be signed off with the nurse's initials. In the reality of a busy shift, it happens to everybody that an initialed signature could be occasionally left off the bottom of the observation chart. The chart shown does not have initialed signatures for 3 of the readings. One is from a student nurse. Asked if that would indicate something sinister, Letby says it would not. A second chart is shown, where there is a gap at 4 AM on the observation readings for the signature initials. None of the signatures are Letby's. Asked if there is anything sinister or strange about this, Letby says it is not. Mr. Myers repeats this for an intensive care chart. Letby says there is nothing sinister about a lack of signature for one of the readings. Mr. Myers refers to an intensive care chart for child Q. The final set of observations at midnight has no initialed signature. The signatures can be missed from time to time, the court hears. Mr. Myers asked about feeding babies at the neonatal unit. Lucy Letby explains the process of administering milk, saying you would aspirate the NG tube first and testing the acidity of the contents of the stomach. Asked if that process is done every time, Letby responds, no. The process of feeding a couple of millilitres would take only a few minutes. For larger babies, it would again be done by gravity feeding, but a dose of 40 ml as an example would take 10 to 15 minutes. The process would be via 10 ml syringes, so the baby would be fed 10 ml at a time. As a lot of babies were premature, the process of feeding would take longer, and for a 40 ml bottle feed, the process would take about half an hour. Mr. Myers asks about blood gas tests for babies. A blood gas test result for child Q is shown to the court. Lucy Letby explains the process on how a blood gas test is obtained, causing a prick onto the heel and getting the blood sample into a very small tube. A second member of staff would run the sample through a machine outside of the nursery rooms to obtain the result. She said, quote, "It would normally usually be a different member of staff, as the first nurse would stay with the baby to check the bleeding stops. The blood gas machine would be down the corridor from room 1. Occasionally, if the machine was broken, an alternative machine on the labour ward would be used." Mr. Myers refers to the neonatal review for child B. This was a document compiled by police which compiled which nursing staff did what for each baby. They include dates and times for observations, prescriptions and feeds. Lucy Letby says the times are approximate to the nearest quarter of an hour, such as weaning change. A note at 9:30 PM of a feed given and an observation would be an approximate time for both. The court hears it is not a precision time for both, as those are two separate activities carried out by the same nurse. Asked about the time between these charts, Lucy Letby explains nursing staff would be busy elsewhere, communicating with families, responding to alarms and other duties, in addition to set tasks as designated by the shift leader. The chart goes into the times of which nursing staff carried out what for child B up to the point of child B's collapse. Mr. Myers refers to prescriptions for child B. Lucy Letby explains 2 nurses would be required for the signatures and prescriptions. Mr. Myers asked about June 2015 to June 2016. Letby says the time was much busier than previous years. We seem to have babies with a lot more complex needs. Letby says staffing levels were not changed to accommodate for this. Letby says they had not encountered a baby on that unit before with chest drain requirements or stomas or haemophilia as they did during June 2015 to June 2016. Letby says she would quite often do more shifts as overtime after being asked to do so than her typical monthly quota. She says, quote, At times it could be very short notice, sometimes from lunchtime and being asked to cover that night. She says she would not know in advance which baby she would be caring for. Mr. Myers asks if it's possible to ask for a particular baby to care for. Letby says it's possible, usually to facilitate continuity of care. Between June 2015 to June 2016, Letby was generally well and did not have any days off sick. Mr. Myers now refers to the babies in the case, asking general questions. He asks about when there is a death on the unit. Letby says the death does have an impact on everyone on the unit, as it was a small unit. Everyone would have a different reaction to it. She says there would be nothing formal as a means of support to deal with such instances, but there would be support among the colleagues. Messages would be exchanged among staff. There was no form of support and no formal structured assistance the court hears. Moving to a day shift in 2016 did not help, Letby says, and Mr. Myers says she continued to work nights anyway. Lucy Letby says staff had to be professional and carry on in caring for the babies who were on the unit. For families, support on offer would come from nurses who had a bereavement guideline. Largely it would be from the nurses, Letby states. We would normally support them as much as we possibly can. The bereavement checklist was formal guidance, and that would include collecting memories for the families. It would normally be the designated nurse for that baby to compile such memories, Letby explains. A checklist is shown for child A. Lucy Letby's signature is present on the entries. She was the designated nurse. The checklist includes, quote, hand and footprints, lock of hair taken, having religious support, taking photos, baby dressed in own clothes. The note includes a memory box, which would, Letby tells the court, be a box donated by neonatal charities and be a storage box for the hand footprints, a lock of hair and a teddy bear, one for the baby and one for the family to keep. A staff debrief would be held, not always, and led by the consultant following the death of a baby on the unit. All staff would be invited to attend. It could be held days or weeks following the baby's death. Letby is asked about activities outside of work. She says she had quite an active social life, attending salsa classes, going on holiday with friends and going to the gym. She would meet friends after work. She lists 5 colleagues, 4 of them nurses and 1 doctor, as people she would meet socially. They were only form of support I had really, says Letby. She is asked about the doctor. He started in 2015 as a registrar, Letby explains. They started knowing each other through work, then would meet socially. Letby says she and other staff would regularly use their phones when at work. The general rule would be not to use phones in clinical areas. Anywhere outside of the nurseries was acceptable, the court hears. Letby is asked about how well staff could get to know families. Letby says those families could be there for several months. She agrees she would also get to know families of babies not on the indictment. She says she would not be the only nurse to keep in touch with families after they had been discharged. She agrees she had looked for parents on Facebook. Mr. Myers asks about her Facebook usage. I was always on my phone, replies Letby. Letby says she would look up many names out of curiosity, such as colleagues, people she had met at the salsa. They would be people who were just on my mind. She agrees she also looked up names of parents on Facebook for babies not named in the indictment. An agreed piece of evidence is now shown to the court. It is titled Facebook Searches by Lucy Letby, June 2015 to June 2016. The searches include the ones previously referred to in court, searching for the parents of babies' names in the indictment, plus on those same days, the Facebook searches for other babies' parents' names, work colleagues and social and non-work related matters. As an example, on June 9, 2015, in addition to a search for the mother's name of child A and child B, Letby carried out searches for 3 social contacts, 2 staffing colleagues Ashley Hudson and David Harkness, and the name of a mother from a child from Liverpool Women's Hospital neonatal unit. Letby says for various searches they were, quote, people on my mind at that moment. The social names would be the ones she had met at salsa, school friends, people she had met socially. The total number of Facebook searches made by Lucy Letby in June 2015 was 113. In July 2015, the total number of Facebook searches was 70. In August 2015, it was 175, and the number of searches in September 2015 is 209. Mr. Myers is asking further questions about Facebook searches carried out by Lucy Letby. Asked why she would carry out a search for one of her nursing colleagues she regularly worked with, Letby replies it was someone who would have been on her mind. The total number of Facebook searches in October 2015 is 173. One of the days, November 5th, 2015, there are 9 searches in 9 minutes. Most are social and 2 are the names of mothers of children in the Liverpool Women's Hospital neonatal unit. Letby says it would not be unusual for her to make several searches in a few minutes on somebody on Facebook. That would be normal for me, she said. The total number of searches in November 2015 is 277. 5 of those related to parents of children in the indictment. The total number of searches in December 2015 is 211. In January 2016 it's 199. In February it's 178. Mr. Myers states, generally speaking, would your pattern of searches be consistent across the month? Letby replies, yes. The number of Facebook searches in May 2016 is 164, and it's 233 for June 2016. For the latter month, none feature any searches for the names of parents of babies in the indictment. Letby denies there is any sinister reason why she should be looking up the names of parents of babies. Letby adds she was always on her phone in her spare time.